Welcome back to the Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence. I'm your host, Sara Payne, and I'm bringing you fascinating conversations with some of the industry's top marketing minds. Today, we're talking about how human capital shows up in brand credibility, customer loyalty, and even market momentum, especially in B2B healthcare, where trust isn't just earned by products or platforms, but by the people behind them. My guest today is Melissa Prusher, a full stack marketing leader with 25 years of experience in B2B professional services with a special focus on healthcare IT. She brings a deep understanding of the B2B buyer journey, sales cycles, and the marketing technologies that support them, always grounding her work in the power of perspective. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Hey, Sarah, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here today.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. You are someone who has spent your career really navigating the complexity of B2B healthcare, where the sales cycles are long, the decision-making process can feel very rational and data-driven. But what's often overlooked in all of that is this human factor, the trust, the credibility, and the connection that people bring to the brand. So let's start there. Why do you think so many B2B companies underestimate the impact that their own people have on brand trust and loyalty?
I think a lot of times that the reason that, it's underestimated the power of people is that people are so focused on their brand logo and what that tells or stands up for what they want it to stand for the market, not really thinking about the basics of people are the greatest asset and that people buy from people. I think it's really starting back at that, core foundation of, whether it's your employees, your partners, your business advocates. There's that human element that really drives brand momentum, makes a difference, and enables, an innovative culture for problem solving.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious what you've witnessed in terms of uh, how people, whether that's employees, leaders, customer facing teams, directly influence how a brand is perceived. Can you give some more specific examples around that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it starts with the delivery and the experiences that the clients are having, and the alignment between the sales, what happens during the sales cycle and what happens during project execution. When there's misalignment, um, it's hard to be able to establish that firm credibility in market leadership because people say, "Hey, what's going on here?" But, when it's the people who are really delivering on the excellence, doing what was set up from the beginning, showing up, whether it's through outcomes, results, collaboration, that really speaks to how work can get done and how that can be a competitive differentiator.
Yeah, absolutely, and I love the word you use there, alignment, because I think it's so important, and you're absolutely right that buyers are gonna pick up on the fact that if, the messaging, the story they hear through the sales process is this way, but then you start an implementation and it feels drastically different than, what they were promised or what they were told during that sales process. I'm curious your perspective, Melissa, on how involved marketing leadership should be in that customer
Mhm,
experience as it
mhm, mhm.
transitions from sales to the teams actually implementing the work.
I mean, marketing has to be involved. There's so many touch points, beyond the meeting, beyond the, bringing the buying committees together. For example, the company website, making sure that that's reflecting the same type of messaging. I think the alignment also in terms of bringing the success stories from inside the organization out. You know, um, Customers aren't just customers, they're partners, so being able to share the success stories and the work that's happening through their voices or through, shared experience, whether it's, co-presenting at a speaking engagement or something, enables that real world visibility into how the work gets done, how the partnership happens, how the organization shows up for their partners as well. So, marketing being able to be aligned with both sales and delivery, make sure that what's being told before someone chooses to work for an organization is aligned with what the experience that they can expect to have once they, enter into an engagement. And then also from there, making sure that there's alignment between, what's actually happening now, between what's promised, and then also capturing what's happening to be able to be used for future storytelling, for future credibility, for even, just future historical for the organization. I think the number one question, sales teams I've worked with have been asked is, where have you done this before? So being able to answer that through the work that's being done, both how it's being presented in the sales cycle and how it's being delivered, extremely valuable, for marketing to be involved in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think marketing's role is to ensure continuity, right? Because the larger the organization, right, a very enterprise organization, the more challenging this can be because you've got implementation teams coming from maybe different service offerings, and just ensuring alignment across, these cultural core values aligned around the customer experience, aligned to the sales team. I think marketing plays an important role to check and challenge that, to audit that, to make sure that it is in fact a experience that's consistent from one side of the business to the other.
Exactly. When organizations are small, it's easy to achieve that consistency because people do collaborate and work in more tightly integrated teams. But as the organization grows, as the complexity of service offerings expands, that becomes even more challenging. So having those central points that can kind of both serve as gatekeeper and advocate, is really valuable in terms of both building the brand, creating customer engagement, and, building that future forward voice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned earlier that, trust is so important in B2B in general, but healthcare specifically. Buyers are often clinicians, sometimes IT leaders, procurement teams, finance, and they're making pretty high stakes decisions. From your vantage point, what makes a brand credible in the eyes of these types of decision makers making such important decisions? You mentioned an important one I imagine you're gonna mention again already, which is sharing these partner success stories. But let's unpack this, what makes a brand credible in the eyes of these types of decision makers?
Yeah. I mean, especially in healthcare, right? When you think of the healthcare buyer and you're thinking of the clinicians, physicians, IT leaders, this is an evidence-based group, right? They want to see
Yes.
things that can deliver upon that. Don't just tell me, but show me. So being able to, really have concrete examples, both again, whether it's something you're presenting or how you show up, um, you have to kind of put some facts behind your claims, especially when you're dealing with people who, naturally operate from a position of evidence. So I think that's one thing, that's super important to look at is, are you backing what you're saying, um, through your actions and then being able to communicate that effectively. So that's probably one of the bigger things when I think of that healthcare buyer and how we, stand up from a credibility and messaging perspective. I think another thing too is, people buy from people. So,
Yes.
having the relationships, marketing on its own isn't enough. You have to have those relationships to extend, what you're trying to put out to market as well, and to be able to create advocacy, a community of advocacy, if you will, so that it's not just you, but there's that peer support and peer messaging as well. One of the things about healthcare, it's such a networked industry as well. So people really do, trust their friends and their peers and people they've worked with before. So being able to, do the right thing even when no one's looking, so that you've got that strong reputation in market, or that people find you credible through your actions, is really important in how you advance as well.
Yeah, you use this phrase community of advocacy, and I absolutely love that. And really thinking about an entire marketing strategy around how are we going to link arms with our partners and other like-minded thought leaders in a very visible public way, right? Like, yeah, we might ask them to provide a recommendation or testimonial or take a call from a prospective customer during the sales process, but how do we also make that more visible on an ongoing basis? And I think that's such an important piece of what many brands are leading into right now, which is building an entire thought leadership program around the problems that they solve in the industry, but doing it together with these partners, right? So it is this true commitment to this isn't just our brand, our products, right, from XYZ company. This is broadly problems that we're trying to solve from all different stakeholder perspective inside of healthcare, and we're actually going to tell those stories together. Maybe we get on a webinar together and we're talking about these issues. Maybe we byline an article together. What's your take on how you take this idea of community of advocacy and really put it into action in a very external way, externally visible way?
I mean, in some cases, right? I mean, there's the earned media and authentic reach, which comes out of doing that. I mean, you're in PR and you pitch company stories, and a lot of times the response is, okay, that's great, but where's the client example? So
100%.
being able to, have that partnership where people are proud of the work and the successes and goals that they've achieved through that partnership, allows for that earned media and authentic reach, which of course extends the brand credibility and brand reach as well. I think even for, paid opportunities, whether you're putting a placement into, say you know, Becker's or somewhere like that, being able to, have that network of people who are willing to take their time, who believe in the partnership, who are willing to share those stories. It allows the marketing team that's making an investment in those avenues also get greater value out of that they're not just, kind of navel gazing, but really, showing to the market too that we have people that, believe enough in our service and our product and our partnership that they're willing to go ahead, and go out through these channels, whether it's, a webinar, an event, media, or whatever, and share as well. So I think it's extremely powerful to do it because, whether it's earned or a paid placement, you're going where people are, right? So you're not necessarily forcing them to go to your corporate website or forcing them to visit your booth at a trade show, but you're engaging where they are, which also gives that added layer of credibility as well because they're already there consuming. So again, it's, can they see themselves? Can they see their peers? It's a way of extending that advocacy. I think too, the employee advocacy component of it shouldn't be overlooked. If you look at your internal network and going back to what I said earlier about people buying from people and not logos, empowering your team to share, whether it's on social or putting a review on Glassdoor or, any of the other platforms, it extends that voice, it extends the people and the network, the power of your network's network, to also benefit from those stories.
Yeah, you just went where I wanted to go, which is it's one, on the one hand, we've got to activate the partners, right? In a authentic, credible way. Link arms have a strategy around that, but there's this whole other piece of it, which is activating and mobilizing the employee base themselves to be storytellers and messengers of this important work that you're doing. So it isn't just this perfectly crystallized message that is being pushed out via the brand social media channels, via the marketing team, but there's this whole other very powerful halo effect that happens when individual employees are sharing their own version of that um, would love to talk to you a little bit more about how do you do that effectively, practical ways to really encourage elevation of those internal voices, and when some might fear losing control or losing the polish that comes through that process.
But before, it was a social media world, and even at the start of that, I think companies focused a lot on the designated spokesperson, and you spent time as a media relations person of, training that singular voice who is going to tell the corporate stories. And of course, over the years, it's become that everybody has a voice and that there's, plenty of people to kind of add different angles and commentary to the stories. Having the control over it and making sure that you've got the message and consistency and, brand experience across all of your ambassadors, that's really where the challenge is today. I think some of it is setting up both formal and informal policies and programs, right? Like, have some guidance that people can understand what it is that is acceptable and allowable and encouraged to do. And also maybe some guidelines of, we never do this or say this, so that you do have some control over it. But from there too, thinking of how you're packaging your information internally, sharing it, even rewarding or motivating people to participate in that engagement and advocacy program. There's platforms too, for organizations that have budget and look at investing tools like Hootsuite, has their own employee advocacy solution as well. So being able to formalize a program where you've got both your content, your graphics, your messaging packaged up, and really easy for people to, hit the easy button to share it to their networks. A lot of people, they like to write, they have a lot of thoughts, they're able to read something and real quickly come up with a cogent thought to post on social. Other people, they want to engage and they're busy, that, they don't necessarily have the time to say, I've got to read this and come up with a two-sentence, point of view. So being able to have, the marketing team or the social team work together to create that content and then put it in a shareable platform that others can share it is a great way of, really sort of bringing that to life. And it's important, right? Because again, there's the power of your network's network. So while your corporate, social footprint is important and absolutely, put some care and tending and nurture that, getting your employee advocacy program off the ground and creating a network of people who are, adding to that symphony of voices about your platform, your services, your customer connections, where you're showing up in the industry, is just start, right? A lot of people say that they're waiting for the perfection. Just start, and build from there.
And how do we as marketing leaders be able to measure and express the value of doing that to executive leadership who might have questions about, the really kind of collecting and mobilizing the employee base in this way? What have you seen work well, in terms of expressing the importance and the value of doing this work to executive leadership?
Yeah. I mean, it comes down to trust, right? You can convert trust into contracts, but it's hard to say, hey, I made a social post on a Tuesday. What's the result? Right? It doesn't work like that, but it is being able to sort of establish that trustworthy voice, and buyers make decisions before they're ever picking up the phone and saying, "Hey, I've got a problem I'm trying to solve." So, the way that you measure that, you could look at things like your utilization rates, what do those look like? Or, are we recruiting better talent? Are our customers staying with us longer? Do we have media interest that we didn't get before? So there's different ways of measuring it. But I think a lot of times, and again, I mean, I've heard this in my own experience as a marketing leader. Hey, we had 3 posts go up yesterday. What happened with that? And, it's a slow build, right? It is that every day getting up and doing it again, because it's about trust, it's about credibility, it's about being present. But there's other things that you can look at from the business thing. Isolating it on its own, it's super hard to say. But I had a CEO once tell me, I'm not quite sure, but I know before we did this, we had a recruiting challenge. And since we've done this, our talent pool is full and we've got plenty of talent within the industry who comes to us and says, "Oh, well, I saw you on LinkedIn." So some of it too is that anecdotal support as well. I think sometimes that the soft results get overlooked, but they can lead to real dollars and real revenue by being consistent and, you know, leveraging your team to establish that credibility, trust, and presence within the industry.
Yeah, and I think part of what you're talking about here, in my perspective, has really been the blessing and the curse of performance-driven marketing, right? It's like we have loads and loads of data and analytics we didn't used to have, and dashboards that say we did X and we got Y, and we're, you know,
Mm.
constantly improving those metrics over time. And yet there are we need to get the executive leadership to understand that these softer things that you're talking about, the relationships, the trust, are things that are built over time and require, consistency in showing up in a certain way. And so it's being able to balance those things of, there are things that we're going to do under this very specific sort of performance driven metrics, and there are these other things that we're going to say all line up together to contribute to, right? And then we're going to look at things like, do we not have a recruitment problem anymore, right? Are we filling these job openings faster? Are we, in the longer run, converting more of these RFPs based on this investment we're making in building trust and deepening relationships with customers and prospects?
That's exactly it, right? That's exactly it. So it is definitely a challenge, and I'm sure, like, every marketer faces that, right? Why are we doing this? Oh, I don't know. We spend a lot of time on it. Is it worth it? But again, you can look at some of those things, the last organization I was with, we grew our LinkedIn followers 55% in a year. So even if you can say, right, like, what does that mean? But now you've engaged with it, doubled your audience. That's more eyeballs that are looking at the content that you're putting out. It's more people who can say that they've had at least a touch point or an experience. We looked at engagement rates that also doubled. So, is your content resonating? Well, if people aren't engaging it and giving it a like or a share, probably not. But if they are, it's another indication that you can look at and say, this is a topic that resonates with our audience. So there's other things that you can glean from it, not necessarily, what's happening now, but what do we need to do next to continue to create that engagement, to create those followers, to, build upon the industry presence that you already have.
Absolutely. You shared a number of really great examples here. Do you have any other real world examples of how this, internal alignment, strong culture helped a brand or company gain traction faster or open new doors in the market?
Yeah, I mean, one of the consulting firms I worked with entered into a new space, so they acquired an organization that supported a different platform, and had to kind of go in and almost rebrand themselves, to show up as an expert in another sort of area of the market. So initially, the thought was, well, nobody's going to know us as anything but this initial organization. So, one of the first things was creating that internal advocacy and an external client program of, highlighting, here's the changes, here's what it means, here's what it matters to you, and the ask to share. So being able to do that helped shift the perception of the business, that allowed it to stand up as really an industry leader in a short period of time, because it wasn't just the organization, in a silo chipping away at what this messaging mean, but really engaging with 400, reps to be able to do that. So it was challenging internal, right? Because getting people to be willing to, do the work for it. But I think it's also, and much like PR, we used to say that PR begets PR. I think employee advocacy and advocacy in general begets other advocacy. So I think when you see your peers doing it, it creates a almost competitive and momentum fueled experience to be able to drive things forward. So that was one of the things that we definitely saw in terms of, living by example and then highlighting those that are doing it to create that sort of friendly competition where others want to do it as well. And of course, it did enable the organization to progress what it needed to do, really through a sort of a grassroots word of mouth um, program.
Yeah, I love that, the context of the example you shared because I think it's so common where there's an acquisition that triggers an entry into an entirely new offering, and maybe it's an entirely new set of decision makers even, right? So you can't even necessarily, maybe you can, maybe you can't leverage existing relationships that you might have, and you have to really figure out how you're going to smartly leverage equity you have in a different space
Yes.
to use that in a credible way to build this
Yeah.
live up to this same reputation in a new space.
Yeah. And I think the internal culture plays a big role in that too, right? When you've got senior leadership that's supportive of it and encouraging the team to engage that way and understands the value of it, that extends throughout the organization as well. There's thrill in building the culture that achieves that as well. But when it starts at the top, it's just a faster path to getting people on board and creating the energy and enthusiasm around it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you're game for this, Melissa, I'd love to have you join me for a few quick fire questions, just whatever comes to your mind first. The first one is name a brand that you admire for how it shows up through its people.
Brand that shows up through its people. Um, oh, that's a good one, Sarah. Let's see, brand that shows up through its people. I don't
Yeah,
want to go back to an organization I worked for in the past because I feel that that's an easy shot, but I definitely worked for an organization in the past that did that. One of the organizations that I always look at that I admire in terms of how they sort of leverage their people around it is Slack. I actually see a lot
Mm.
of their employees both, sharing both, how the tool is used, the successes that come from organizations that are using it. So I know when I was, looking at it in a former organization from a decision making perspective, there were a lot of good stories and ways of the tool being used that we hadn't even thought of, whether it's creating communities or chat threads or stuff, for internal uses and stuff. So I think they do a good job of getting their people to engage and share. I don't
It's
know
a
if
great
you've always,
example.
yeah, sorry, not healthcare related, but I do when I think of a company that does a good job at that. That's what comes to mind first.
Yeah, no, I think it's important that in B2B and in healthcare, we look outside of B2B and healthcare for inspirational examples of brands and companies that are leaders, that we can aspire to. Next question is, what's a marketing myth you wish would just go away?
Marketing myth, I would just go away. Um, I think it's if we don't know where it goes in the organization, marketing can do it. So I think there's a lot of stuff that ends up on marketing's plate that isn't necessarily marketing. So I think the marketing is the catch-all for all things that have to get done when we don't know how they should get done is something that should, maybe not make its way into 2026 as we look at moving ahead.
Absolutely. I think a lot of our listeners would agree with you on that one wholeheartedly. What's one piece of advice you'd give to a B2B healthcare marketer trying to build trust in a crowded space? And I admit this one's a little bit less of a quick fire question, but one piece of advice you would give to someone trying to build trust in a crowded space.
So if you're trying to build trust in a crowded space, and even in an uncrowded space, do the right thing. Right? Do the right thing by your customers, by your employees, by your team, by your partners, by industry analysts. When you do the right thing and you show up authentically, um, you build trust by how you live and how you execute and how you show up.
Great advice. And that's what makes you a great leader, Melissa. My last question is, what's the best advice you've ever gotten from a leader? And it doesn't have to be marketing specific.
Best advice I got from a leader. Um, I don't know if it was an actual advice, but more of a mindset. And that is really to don't sweat things. Do the best you can, with what you have available. But, things sometimes don't go the way that they've planned, and you've got to be able to pivot and adjust and not, break down as a result of it. And when things, go swimmingly, don't get too caught up in the hype either, right? So, keep yourself even cool and even keeled rather, and stay cool is probably the best advice that I got. Things change, things happen, and, being able to be resilient and being able to pivot, I think is probably one of the best things that I've been told and has brought a lot of peace to me, both in my career and professional life
I love that. And personal life too, for that
and
matter.
personal life. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well,
So,
thanks, Melissa. Thanks so much for joining me today. We've had the privilege of working together in the past, and you're just such a fantastic leader. I just feel really fortunate to be able to have this conversation today and share so much of your wisdom with our listeners. How can folks get in touch with you?
yeah, I mean, the best way I think is just right through LinkedIn, whether it's, through a connect or a direct message. I make it a daily habit of checking in on the platform, trying to get my own social media presence going and post a little more frequently. But I love the one-on-one exchanges that I have and, building my network and engaging with other people who are interested in the topic of marketing, sales, B2B, and healthcare IT.
Awesome. Well, folks, definitely reach out to Melissa on LinkedIn, Melissa Prusher, and connect with her there. Absolutely. It was a real pleasure. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed the show today, do us a favor and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for being part of the Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence, because the future of healthcare depends on it. We'll see you next time.